سائنس ٹاکس سیریز میں آپ کا خوش آمدید. آج ہم نے دعوت دی ہے امریکہ کی ایک یونیورسٹی آف بفلو جو ہے, وہاں جو اسکول آف آرکیٹیکچر اینڈ پلاننگ پروفیسر سمینا راجا. یہ صرف ایک ہی کام نہیں کرتی ہیں, شی از ویئرنگ مینی ہیٹس اینڈ she is into research, she is into food planning, she is into health. Basically the focus of her the core competence of her exercise is کہ healthy communities کیسے ممکن ہے using on one side urban planning. وہ بیسیکلی فوکس ہے ان کی ریسرچ کا اور ان کی اسٹڈیز کا. تو یہ ایک لیب بھی ہیڈ کرتی ہیں, تو زیادہ ہم انہی سے پوچھ لیں گے. لیکن پہلے خوش آمدید میڈم.
السلام علیکم, تھینک یو فار دی انویٹیشن, اٹس اے پلیزر ٹو بی ہیئر.
شروع ہم اس بات سے کریں گے کہ آپ تو بیسیکلی ان دا ڈیولپنگ ورلڈ فوڈ سیکورٹی از اے میجر ایشو. تو یہ بیسیکلی واٹ از دا اسٹیٹ اینڈ اسٹیٹس آف فوڈ انسیکورٹی اینڈ ہاؤ ڈز اٹ مینیفیسٹ اٹ سیلف. مطلب اس کے خدوخال کیا ہوتے ہیں بعد میں جب فوڈ انسیکورٹی ہو جاتی ہے.
سو فوڈ انسیکیورٹی کو اگر ڈیفائن کریں گے, سو دیر آر ڈفرنٹ ڈیفینیشنز, الگ الگ جگہوں پہ الگ الگ قسم کی ڈیفینیشن ہے. ایک طریقے سے اس کو ڈیفائن کرتے ہیں کہ اگر لوگوں کے پاس کنٹینیوس ایکسیس نہیں ہے کھانے کے لیے یا ان کی خوراک کے لیے, تو ہم اس کو فوڈ انسیکیورٹی بولتے ہیں. فوڈ انسیکیورٹی از ڈفرنٹ دین ہنگر. جو یہ کٲشِر پٲٹھۍ اگر وَنان people when they are hungry یا بۄچھِ لگان, that's a physical sensation. But food insecurity is about deprivation over time. So I might not be hungry, but if for the last 6 months I have not had food, then I am food insecure. But food insecurity is only a partial explanation. What is really also important to understand is food insecurity اس لیے prevalent ہے دنیا میں because we also have the lack of food sovereignty. So food insecurity is a problem globally, but it manifests more in particular parts of the world, as you pointed out, in the developing world. I think it's also important to understand what's ironic is کہ دنیا کی جو fruits and vegetables اگائے جاتے ہیں وہ actually developing world سے آتے ہیں, بٹ اور اسمال ہولڈر فارمرز کے ذریعے سے آتے ہیں, بٹ وہی لوگ بھی ویسے ہیں کہ جو فوڈ انسیکیور ہیں.
فوڈ سیکورٹی اور انسیکورٹی, یا یہ جو آج کل کی نئی ٹیکنالوجیز آئی ہیں تھوڑا اس کو بیلنس کرنے کے لیے ٹو مینیج دا ڈیفیسٹ, اس پر بات کرنے سے پہلے یہ میں درخواست کروں گا تھوڑا آپ اپنی اکیڈمک کیریئر رہا ہے سری نگر سے لے کر بفلو یونیورسٹی تک, تو اس میں آپ تو بیسیکلی سول انجینئر ہیں, اب اربن پلاننگ ہے, مطلب یہ بہت سارا آپ کرتے ہیں. تو لیکن اس سے بہتر کہ میں آپ کو انٹروڈیوس کروں, اٹ از بیٹر دیٹ یو ٹاک اباؤٹ یور سیلف.
یو آر ایبسلیوٹلی کریکٹ. میں بائی ٹریننگ سول انجینئر ہوں اور ساتھ میں ماسٹرز کیا ہے اربن پلاننگ میں اور پی ایچ ڈی بھی اربن پلاننگ میں کی ہے. تو یہ جو ٹریجیکٹری ہے کریئر کی, ٹریننگ ان سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی اینڈ انجینئرنگ اینڈ اربن پلاننگ, یہ ساری چیزیں اس لیے ہیں کہ ان کی وجہ سے میں ہمیشہ آئی واز انٹرسٹیڈ کہ ہم جب گھر بناتے ہیں, مکان بناتے ہیں یا سڑک بناتے ہیں یا اگر ہم سٹی پلان کرتے ہیں تو وہ ہم کیوں کرتے ہیں. گھر چاہیے تاکہ ہمارے پاس پروٹیکشن ہو, سو دیٹ وی ہیو شیلٹر, اور سڑک اس لیے چاہیے تاکہ ہم ڈل گیٹ سے لال چوک پہنچ سکیں, رائٹ. بٹ اربن پلاننگ اور سول انجینئرنگ کا فنڈامنٹل گول ہے کہ زندگی بہتر بنے, دیٹ لوگوں کی ہیلتھ بہتر بنے. تو میری ٹریننگ میں اور میرے کریئر میں ہمیشہ ایک ایمفسس رہا ہے کہ جب ہم ایک انجینئرنگ ڈیسیجن لیتے ہیں, ایک سائنٹیفک ڈیسیجن لیتے ہیں, اس کا ہیومن ہیلتھ پہ کیا اثر پڑتا ہے. تو ایز اے سول انجینئر آئی واز آلویز انٹرسٹیڈ ان کہ جب ہم گھر بناتے ہیں یہ کیسے ہیومن ہیلتھ پروٹیکٹ کرتا ہے. ایز اربن پلانر جب ہم زمین ڈیولپ کرتے ہیں اس پہ کیا اثر پڑتا ہے. تو ایک کپل آف ایگزامپلز میں دوں گی سری نگر کے متعلق. تو سری نگر میں کچھ کچھ علاقے ہیں جہاں پہ اگر آپ گھر اور دکان نزدیک ہے تو پلان ایسا ہے کہ آپ پیدل جا سکتے ہیں. دیٹ مینس آپ کی فزیکل ایکٹیویٹی ہو رہی ہے. مگر اگر آپ کا گھر بہت دور ہے اور آپ کے پاس کوئی دکان سے دور ہے تو آپ کو چل کے نہیں جا سکتے ہیں. آپ کو اب گاڑی میں چڑھنا ہے اور پھر دور جانا ہے, جو کہ حالات امریکہ میں ہے. یہاں پہ بہت جگہوں پہ آپ پیدل کہیں نہیں جا سکتے ہیں, آپ کو گاڑی میں بیٹھنا ہے اور دور جانا ہے. اس کی وجہ سے کیا ہوتا ہے نا, اس پلاننگ کی وجہ سے لوگوں کی فزیکل ایکٹیویٹی ریٹس ڈاؤن ہو جاتی ہیں, کرونک ڈیزیز بڑھتی ہیں. تو میری جو ٹریننگ جو آپ نے مجھ سے پوچھی ہے, سول انجینئرنگ, اربن پلاننگ وغیرہ, یہ سب اس دے فوکس آن کہ جو ہم ڈیسیژنز بناتے ہیں مکان کے, پلانس کے, نیبرہڈ پلانس کے, ان کا ہیومن ہیلتھ پہ کیا اثر پڑتا ہے. سو یہ سائنس جو ہے یہ انٹر ڈسپلنری ہے. تو میری ٹریننگ ڈیفینیٹلی سول انجینئرنگ اور اربن پلاننگ میں ہے, بٹ the emphasis is کہ اس کا فائدہ انسان کی صحت پہ کیسا ہوتا ہے.
میرے سوال کا جو دوسرا حصہ تھا, یہ جو جرنی رہی سری نگر سے دنیا کے دوسرے کونے تک, تو اس میں بہت سے چیلنجز رہے ہوں گے, تھوڑا سا وہ بتا دیجیے گا.
سو میری انڈر گریجویٹ ٹریننگ سول انجینئرنگ میں تھی. تو کشمیر میں اس کو گریجویشن بولتے ہیں, پر یہاں انڈر گریجویٹ بولتے ہیں. تو بیچلرز میرا سول انجینئرنگ میں رہا, اور میرا آئی واز انٹرسٹیڈ ان کہ یہ گھر کس کے لیے بنا رہے ہیں. سری نگر سے اور کشمیر سے کافی آئی واز انٹرسٹیڈ ان کہ کیسے بنا رہے ہیں. پر جب میں نے وہ انجینئرنگ ٹریننگ ختم کی, دا کوشچن دیٹ آئی ہیڈ واز کہ یہ گھر کس کے لیے بن رہے ہیں, یہ گھر ٹھیک جگہ بن رہے ہیں کہ نہیں. ہمارا جو کشمیر ہے فار ایگزامپل ارتھ کویک پرون زون ہے, تو ہم جو مکان وہاں بنا رہے ہیں یہ زندگی کے لیے مفید ہیں یا خطرے میں ہم کو ڈال رہے ہیں. تو وہ سوال میرے انجینئرنگ میں پورے مجھے جواب نہیں مل رہے تھے. سو دیٹ واز دا فرسٹ اسٹیپ. It felt that I was trained to build, but I was not trained to think. So that got me interested in thinking about why are we building, what is the impact on health. Then I sought something that was bigger scale, and I pursued a master's in urban planning. Usme I focused on housing again to think کہ جب ہم گھر بناتے ہیں وہ کس کے لیے بناتے ہیں, اس کا کیا اثر پڑتا ہے. اس میں بھی کچھ چیزیں مجھے سیٹسفیکٹری لگیں, پر کچھ چیزیں بالکل سیٹسفیکٹری نہیں لگیں. تو اس کے بعد میں نے سوچا کہ ضروری ہے تھوڑا اور ایڈوانس ٹریننگ کرنی, تاکہ آئی کین فگر آؤٹ ہاؤ ٹو پٹ مائی انجینئرنگ اسکلز ٹو یوز ان دا سروس آف ہیلتھ. اینڈ دیٹ براٹ می ٹو my PhD in urban planning, which I pursued in the United States. تو میری انڈر گریجویٹ ٹریننگ اور ماسٹرز ٹریننگ دونوں انڈیا میں ہوئی. تو میں نے انڈر گریجویٹ ڈگری جامعہ ملیہ اسلامیہ سے کمپلیٹ کی ہے, اور ماسٹرز ٹریننگ اسکول آف پلاننگ اینڈ آرکیٹیکچر ان نیو دہلی. بٹ اٹ واز even both of those degrees, it felt کہ وہ کچھ سوال میرے پورے کمپلیٹ نہیں ہو رہے تھے. تو اس سلسلے میں یونائٹڈ اسٹیٹس میں نے یونیورسٹی آف وسکانسن میڈیسن سے پی ایچ ڈی کیا. جب میں نے شروع کیا وہاں کام, تو میری پہلی کلاس جو تھی وہ ایتھکس پہ تھی, جو کہ ایک سبجیکٹ ہے جو ایز اے سول انجینئر انڈر گریجویٹ ٹریننگ میں یا کشمیر میں یا انڈیا میں یا کہیں بھی ڈیولپنگ کنٹریز میں اتنا ایمفسس نہیں دیتے ہیں. پر پی ایچ ڈی میں ایتھکس کی ٹریننگ پہلا کلاس تھا میرا, وچ واز ویری سیٹسفائنگ کہ آپ جب زمین ڈیولپ کر رہے ہو, آپ کیوں ڈیولپ کر رہے ہو, کس کے لیے ڈیولپ کر رہے ہو. سو دیر واز دا سائنٹیفک میتھڈ, بٹ دیر واز آلسو بلینڈنگ کہ تو کیا اچیو کران. سو مائی پی ایچ ڈی دین اینڈیڈ اپ بینگ ریئلی اباؤٹ لینڈ ڈیولپمنٹ اینڈ لیئرڈ آن ٹو دیٹ پبلک فائنینس. تو یہ جو میں یہ ڈفرنٹ ٹریجیکٹری آپ کو بتا رہی ہوں, کشمیریوں کے لیے بہت ہی کنفیوزنگ ہے کہ یہ کام کیا ہے. انفیکٹ آئی ریمبر میرے والد نے مجھے وہ ابھی دے ہیو پاسڈ اوے, آئی ریمبر ہم سیئنگ بیٹا یہ چھُنہٕ مےٚ فکری تران, گرا چھُ اکنامکس, گرا چھُ انجینئرنگ, گرا چھُ اتھ کٔنۍ, مگر like he understood of course ultimately. But then I ended up studying when we make land development decisions and building, what is the impact on human health? And then I realized every time we make a decision to build a house in Rajbagh or Dalgate, wherever, we are actually making a decision about the health of future generations. तो मेरी PhD उस पर थी. उसके बाद मैंने कोशिश की एक्चुअली कि मैं अपना रिसर्च इमीडिएटली कश्मीर पे करूं, but that was not possible. And there's a long story there, but that was not possible. So I ended up pursuing research in the United States, and then alhamdulillah, I was able to do it globally. And I am focused on Kashmir, but my research is really global. Okay, I'm going to pause.
What was the takeaway kya the PhD se?
Acha, हाँ, great question. So PhD में I trained with urban planners, economists. तो यहाँ जब PhD होती है वो मुख्तलिफ है मेरे ख्याल से कश्मीर से, क्योंकि I do have college. तो सवाल ये था कि जब urban planner ज़मीन प्लान करते हैं, एक comprehensive master plan जिसको कश्मीर में कहते हैं, बनाते हैं, और यहाँ ब्रिज, यहाँ मकान, यहाँ पार्क, ये सब, तो ये सब डिसीजंस बनाते हैं, तो इसके कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस क्या होते हैं. तो मेरी PhD एक्चुअली वाज टाइड टू फूड, बिकॉज मैं ऑब्जर्व कर रही थी कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स में जैसे लैंड डेवलप करते हैं और जैसे कश्मीर में लैंड डेवलप करते हैं बहुत ही मुख्तलिफ है. तो कश्मीर के लैंड डेवलप में भी कुछ एडवांटेजेस हैं, कुछ नुकसानदेह चीज़ें हैं. वैसे ही यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स में भी कुछ एडवांटेजेस हैं, कुछ नुकसानदेह चीज़ें हैं. क्योंकि मैं कश्मीर को उस टाइम स्टडी नहीं कर पा रही थी फॉर लॉजिस्टिकल रीजंस, तो मैंने यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स को उस टाइम स्टडी किया. एंड द एक्चुअल क्वेश्चन वाज, ये अर्बन प्लानर यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स मंज ज़मीन छ डेवलप करान, फॉर एग्जांपल फ्रॉम ये तो फार्म वन बनावन मकान, what is the consequence for the city government on their public finance, on their taxation? Because there is an idea in urban planning, yet Vanancha loosely, highest and best use of land, right? I think this is also used sometimes in Kashmir and in South Asia. So there is a heuristic, ak andaz, ki yichu farmland, yichu tuta mufid, yichu makan, and sit baniponsi you could have developed. So I actually measured whether that is accurate. So there is a very widespread global method that teaches urban planners how to judge whether land development is good or bad. I tested whether it's good or bad, and I discovered that the methods that planners use are flawed. They are wrong. So that was the dissertation, and what it led me to believe is that it could urban planner plan chikaran, you should ultimately insanas khatra, lukan khatra, thoda harmful asan. Simple translation to amuk, you thui toy kashire kashtkar san zameen niyo, and you're going to turn it into a house, McMansion, board makan, and you think that's a sign of progress. It turns out it is not. It's complicated. And that was the dissertation.
जब हम यहाँ PhD करते हैं, तो PhD is just a process after which you submit a dissertation. It is kept अलमीरा में रहती है वो dissertation, और फिर आपको एक document देते हैं जिसको आप certificate कहते हैं. Then you apply for jobs and you become a teacher. That is by and large the situation in 2/3 or maybe more case of more PhDs. But in the West, when PhD is an investment, systemic and systematic investment in an individual. So, आपकी जब dissertation आ गई, did it change anything?
That's a good question. So, immediately it didn't, and it's important for other PhD students to understand that research sometimes to translate into action takes time. So I don't want students, other people to feel disheartened. My dissertation honestly generated more questions than it offered answers. The key question that it generated is it could aise understanding chiki zameenuch istemal kya chu appropriate. That is a complicated issue, and it forced me to reimagine how to plan. Because of that, it set me on a trajectory, right? So it set me on a trajectory to develop tools and resources, and fortunately, alhamdulillah, I had amazing teachers. So I ended up contributing to this whole field of food systems planning. And actually my research lab is the first one in the world that uses urban planning to improve food systems. So I was able to take my learning from the dissertation and apply it in one particular way to develop the lab, work with city government, develop technical assistance models, and train, of course, students. So I think my impact of that dissertation is translated into the real world today. I can look back. I mean, I've been working here for 20 years, but I couldn't tell you that immediately you could my dissertation to you go impact. That is not fair to any PhD student. Sometimes maybe they can do it, but that was not my experience. But my experience was when I finished it, I was able to generate tools that did have an impact. And I can give examples of that if you're interested.
Basically, I am interested in understanding at least one thing. What has been the contribution of your lab, which is the only lab of this kind in the world? What has been
well, it was the first. I don't think it's the only anymore. There are a few others, but we were the first. So I'll give examples. It could tohe thoda kashran baise ajeeb kya kaam chhe engineering to be food. Yithe koit os nazari United States asmanse. So when I started this work, let me give you an example. In 2014, my team conducted a national survey of urban planners in the United States. Yechit saji saas local governments. Local government matlab go city government. Exactly. The United States manshitim saji saas government. So timanchi sari urban plan. So I sent them this survey and I asked them yeltoi plan ch banaman amuk impact kya ch sehtas per banan be food as per banan, and only 1% said that it has an impact and that we are doing something about it. Matlab even in 2014 urban planners in the United States were not aware. So my lab's contribution has been to push that change and to push urban planners in the United States to understand that. So some examples. There is an association called the American Planning Association, which is the largest professional association of urban planners. It could, it's like a professional association. So they asked me and I agreed to write the first guidance for American planners. So that was published in 2008. So signed lab book of contribution that trained everybody. And then a second contribution to signed lab to pura United States as local government and training them on. Yel agar kaise sochun ais ki master plan kya ch sethas per impact pevan, it's our lab that responds. Go ak example. Ithai kaichu when United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. It could urban planner and chuna andaz ki tihin decision ch sehtas per impact pevan. Tithai could also UN Food and Agricultural Organizations bilkul andaz ki urban planning has a role. In fact, timar hot menish mashwara and the book as tarib fikre. So in 2000 and I don't remember the year, recently, they asked me and I agreed to develop a document, a guidance for the UN ki timanti gets fikre tarun ki yeltim food aspect kam chikaran tachu asar pevan urban planning. The so guidance document kar as literally 2021 months published. So those are two examples. US guidance and UN guidance both came from the lab. The third that I will give is we can't give this guidance without doing the actual experiments and studies, right? So sign lab kya chikam karan, ish measure karan, ish devices lagan lukan, ish GIS istemal karan, yuthais fikre tayri ki lukan hinden sehtas per kya chu asar pevan. So I have published work that shows the type of neighborhood you live in, it land use development chu gatsan tam sit kya chu chronic disease asar peman. So in lab chu tim studies te karan pachu so translate karan policy guidance. So that would be, I would say, some examples. I can give more, but that's enough for now.
No, but all the three are very impressive. What else you are doing? You mentioned about you are involved in a lot of studies globally. So which are these studies, and what have you found out or suggested in the investigations or academic probes you might have carried out?
Also a great question. So one of the decisions that our lab made, that I made, we only focus on research that impacts marginalized people. So agar I say request you want to Norway man's we decline because it's a high resource country. So we work globally, but we only work in low resource settings. That's just a value decision that I have made. So because of that, our global work is focused on global South countries and specific locations in those settings. We have projects completed in Jamaica, which is a Caribbean country. We have a team leading work in Ghana. And then we have colleagues working in Kerala, in India. And then we have colleagues and teams working in Kashmir as well. In all of that work, to give you an example, I want to make you look and measure karan health kit impact gatsan. The best way to understand that is really to observe and learn from kashtkar, from farmers. And the reason is that farmers eat and they also grow food. Tihun perspective chasan, zindagi chasan, it's really illuminating for science. So one of the projects that we have completed, and it informed the UN, was we tracked farmers' experiences in different parts of the world. Youth aesthetic that what is the impact of urban planning on them? Damage findings just straightforward. This will not surprise anybody. The straightforward finding is today, globally, urban planning decisions are being implemented to undermine food sovereignty, undermine food security. And they are especially undermining farmland preservation and farming. This is also true in Kashmir. And they are especially impacting smallholder farmers. So this is true in every part that we have studied. On the flip side, what we have noticed in some places, in fact, also in Srinagar, that even though urban planning decisions are negatively impacting farmers, small-scale farmers are trying to resist those bad urban planning decisions, and they are still the front line for protecting health of their communities. Example, Dimbakashirihun, Srinagar, nutrition rates and food security rates in Srinagar district are better than South Asia, like many parts of South Asia, including the Indian subcontinent. And the reason for that is ki historically lakad zameen pattern, kashkar che hak wabdavan, that green is distributed throughout the city. It's a nutritious, affordable, health impacting product. So even though urban planning decisions are negatively impacting health in Srinagar, the kashtkars are actually protecting people's health. So that's kind of a finding that we have reported on.
Great.
I think the implication is Bhavana looking directly. I think Kashmiris have to understand, and I say this also in the United States, you have to protect your local food supply chain. You have to eat and buy and consume food that is not processed. That means it needs to be close to the farm. Agar haki, that is better than anything that comes out of a package. So if it comes in a package, cut it out. If it comes from the ground, eat it.
I'll ask you a question that is by and large an imagination, a wild kind of an imagination. Plainly, utopia. If we tell you tomorrow to reconstruct Srinagar, what will you do?
Again, this might surprise people in Kashmir and the way planning is happening. So the first thing I would do is actually sit down with people. The idea that a planner has the genius to come up with grand ideas is bogus. I'm really sorry to put it just plainly. It's an exported model from the West. Sun, 1970s months hitchno koi miskit kaichu plan banaun. But really, the way planning we teach today, and I know that this is also happening in other parts of the world, the best ideas really come from the community. I suppose if I could do that utopian thing, but and I would ask them, how can we protect this neighborhood? How can we develop this area so that it is protective to you and to people in the community? So planning is not only a scientific technical exercise. It is actually a process exercise. I can give examples of what works, but the first answer is it needs to be a good process. It needs to be an inclusive process. It needs to be an equitable process, and it needs to privilege people with the least amount of power. In Srinagar, that is Kashtkar. When I'm there, we depend on those Kashkars, but we are not listening to them. So that's one, a process answer. When go digar, agar, because I actually also grow myself. I will tell you, if I had the ability to guide planning, Srinagar actually has quite a brilliant policy framework for the master plan. I have reviewed it very closely, and I followed the process quite well. Your current master plan, so opening that policy framework, but zabardast. In fact, it's comparable to many master plans globally. I followed that very carefully. That gets you problem got something master plans. You treat that implementation so it's like we do not implement the policy framework that is in the master plan. So some of the examples I'll give of agar they are actually in the beginning of the Srinagar master plan. Examples. I would reduce the tendency to put gray cover, gray top everywhere. So which of Kashmir kya dalil che? Ashu zameen, zarkhe zameen. We are putting driveways, cement driveways. We're putting roads, we're putting highways, we're putting flyovers. That is bad for human health. It's bad for the environment. So the first thing I would do is measure all the gray surface and cut it down. So now there are lots of examples globally about how to manage that. Yechuvanan timan rain gardens. Kashir sari banavan tat vanan driveway. Here we are pulling them up, we're tearing them apart. In city of Toronto in Canada, they are literally dismantling flyovers, but in Srinagar we are building them. So I would put a stop to that. But Srinagar needs mobility. There should be investments in other forms of travel. So you could say old European cities, for example, other parts of the world, even global south. There can be trolleys, electric trolleys that can be put in. Agar like we would develop that. Dependence on the car and creating city of Srinagar for car mobility is harmful for us in the long run. So that would have to be stopped. I can keep on going, but these things, this gray cover is also tied to the flooding we have. It's tied to human health. Some of it is in hands of people. Consider not building cement driveways all the time, but also reducing the number of flyovers and roads that are being built.
Before concluding this session, I just have one last question. I have many, but it may not permit this duration of the program. We are living at a place, it's a small valley, it is not so huge, but we are surrounded by Pir Panchal and other range of mountains. We are glacial fed. And now the problem is that this climatic change is making an example of us.
Yes.
We have huge discharge fall in our rivers. Our glaciers are melting quite fast. We are having very abnormal rainfalls and snow accumulation over the peaks. So this is impacting the agriculture and a lot many things. So we have already given up agriculture. We barely grow around 20% of our main staple food. So even if we get a textbook implementation of the urban planning in Kashmir, how can we manage the larger thing that oversees us from the peaks?
It's a good question. So what you have pointed out is what I would call a structural problem, a systems problem. So if you are witnessing a systems problem in Kashmir, you cannot solve a systems problem with a narrow solution. So climate change is a systems problem. And frankly, Kashmiris are not the ones responsible for it. It's the West that is responsible for it. Like greenhouse gas emissions are coming from other parts of the world, and they're impacting Kashmir and other parts of the world.
Western disturbances.
Exactly, 100% agreed. So it's a systems problem and it needs a system solution. The things that are in control of Srinagar or Kashmir, obviously you have to implement them. But I also think that we Kashmiris have to advocate globally. And those of us who are outside of Kashmir have to play that role too. But within Kashmir, yus cheez aspanas controlos tamachu supais eskaron. So I'll give examples. I already gave you the driveway example. The second example is access to water is very difficult in Srinagar. Already, like in a water resource abundant region, Ashuna Abi, right? So there are lots of examples for that, but there are some things people can control. For example, in other parts of the world, we are doing something called rainwater harvesting. ऐसे पाइजे rainwater harvesting करें. Actually traditional kashir tariqa yim aisna to buzu zarif sabins kat. Like if we implement some of those traditional things, they are good science. We have to find good science to blend with what is culturally appropriate. Aab nazai karon, rainwater harvesting karin. One of my big concerns is the excessive use of automobiles and emissions in Srinagar, and then tied to land use pattern, this emphasis on horticulture. So we are really emphasizing horticulture, and the burning from that horticultural waste that happens once a year or a couple of times a year, you will notice that actually the pollution levels go up. There are other scholars that are better versed to speak to that. Actually, Dr. Ramshu is, and I've learned this from his work. So there are some things we can control, but there are some things we have to participate in global advocacy, and we have to publish and we have to communicate. And people are doing that. But I would say that we need a structural solution, many different things.
Professor Raja, you spared so much of time for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.